Welcome to another episode of Divinity Connecting the Dots. I am your host, Nivi Jaswal. Our guest today is a rising star of the plant-based movement who was born vegan. Yes, you heard it right. She has never, at least knowingly, consumed dairy and meat in her entire life. She contends that science isn't as black and white as the media often portrays it. As a former science teacher and vegan educator, she has a passion for nuanced, honest, and holistic conversations exploring the gray areas of science, ethics, in society. I'm looking forward to chatting with Sarina Farb on controversial scientific topics, propaganda masquerading as science, and also learn how our morals and ethics can and should shape science and how it's applied in society. We'll be right back to connect the dots on veganism, education, and all matters of public and planetary health in just a minute. Welcome, Sarina. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm good. And I'm so glad to be here doing this.
Well, thank you. So are we. And as I just mentioned to our viewers, you were born vegan. Tell me everything about it.
Yeah, I was. And, it really surprises a lot of people to hear that. And one of the most common questions I get asked when people learn that is, well, have I ever wanted to taste animal products? Have I ever wanted to try meat, dairy, or eggs? And my very truthful, honest answer is absolutely no. And I've never had any interest in that. And the reason for that, I believe, is because my parents didn't just raise me vegan, but they also taught me what veganism was and why. So it wasn't just this diet. It wasn't just this is our family and our lifestyle and what we do, but they explained it from when I was, 3-4 years old, when they were feeding me, and there were way fewer vegan, junk food alternatives in the 90s, but there still were vegan ice creams and some fake meats out there. And when they'd feed me, like a veggie hot dog or something, or we'd be at a party with other people, they always made sure to call it like a veggie hot dog. And they'd say, why don't we eat real hot dogs? And they distinguish that even though these items might look somewhat similar, that they were very different things, and that one was made of animals and one was made of plants. And we didn't eat things made with animals because we love animals. And of course, they used age-appropriate language to talk to me about this, and it changed as I got older. But when I was really little, the basics were, we love animals, we don't eat them. And that just made perfect sense to me. It was like, duh, of course I don't want to hurt animals. We had, cats and dogs. We had some turkeys when I was younger, rescued, that lived with us. And so I had a lot of opportunities as well to interact with real living animals. And of course I loved them and wouldn't want to see them hurt or injured. And it made perfect sense to my young brain. But one of the more difficult pieces of this, so it wasn't that I ever felt left out or that I, wanted to eat what other people were eating. I didn't. I really didn't, don't to this day. But the hard part was, because I knew this information, when I saw friends or peers eating animals, I couldn't understand why. That was the most difficult thing. It was, well, of course, like, don't they love animals too? Like, why would they want to hurt animals? Yeah. And, that was what was difficult for me, especially because my parents also taught me how to read labels when I was, 6 or 7 and learning to read. We had these flashcards, and one side would have an ingredient like gelatin and the other side would have a description of what it was and how it was made.
Wow.
And they gave me all of these. Yeah. You have a question?
Yes. So I have so many questions.
Okay.
So did your parents make these flashcards, or back in the, they did?
Yes. My mom made them.
Awesome. All right. Tell me more. Tell me everything. I'm busy taking notes, and I'm pretty sure parents are watching this right now.
Okay. Well, I actually have a copy of the note cards that my mom helped me remake recently that you can purchase and download on my website.
Okay.
there's 40 of them with like a bunch of common ingredients. And I think it was great. It helped me so much because my parents did this when I was like 6 or 7 with the idea that then when I was out in the world, they wouldn't control what I ate or chose to do because they had empowered me to sort of make my own food choices.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I'm just so excited about this because it's amazing. You know, it's one thing to connect the dots on theory, you know, like in a book or in on paper or on a podcast. But it's entirely different to actually connect the dots with a child and then to keep doing that in real time and raise them with this ethic. Yeah. And you were on the receiving end of it. You were the recipient of
Yeah.
very mindfully, very thoughtfully, not just creating vocabulary that was very different from mainstream, but also walking their talk in terms of getting you access to rescue animals and seeing that, you know, when mom and dad say this, they actually, you know, do this too. So we're sort of living that ethic. You mentioned about this conflict that you experienced when others, and especially your friends who, you know, claimed that they loved animals just as much, but they weren't walking their talk. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that was the hard part for me. I could eat vegan alternatives. I didn't feel left out. My parents did their best to provide those. And then, but friends would ask me, oh, why can't you have this candy? And because I'd use these note cards and learn these ingredients, I would say, I can, I choose not to. That was really the learning the ingredients, being able to read labels for myself helped me feel really empowered in my choices. And so I would tell kids, like, well, I choose not to. Like, don't you know what gelatin's made of? Let me explain it to you. Wow. And yeah, and that was in some ways that was very difficult because in my head, and this was also kind of the way my parents framed it, which makes sense for a young child, they explained it as not everyone knows the information we know, which is a piece of the truth. Obviously, there's other reasons people don't change. But that was kind of what I thought. And so in my head, well, my friends just didn't know. So if they knew the information I knew, then they would also want to go vegan or not want to eat animal products. Yeah. And it surprised me, every time when someone would be eating candy that asked why I couldn't have it, I'd be like, oh, I read the label, there's gelatin in it. What's gelatin? And then I would describe in graphic detail to them how gelatin was made. And I remember, I was like 7 around this time, and a kid in gymnastics I was, with would be like, oh, whatever, and like pop the candy in their mouth. I was just stunned. I was like, how can you, like, I just told you, isn't that gross? And doesn't that disgust you? And like, why would you want to eat that? And it was very difficult for me to comprehend that. And I really struggled with that.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand. Because even as adults, and especially as adults who are choosing a whole food, plant-based or a vegan diet for, several reasons, they find it very difficult to execute upon that approach and navigate society, because there's, as you rightly pointed out, people don't have the information. So one is sheer pure ignorance. And then there's, even if you have the information, the blinders are on and embedded so deeply that we, a lot of people just don't give, a flying F, Jane's not going to be happy with me swearing on her show, but, so this is when you spoke to adults. Were there, when you spoke to children, were there any adults who approached you and said, Sarina, tell us more about this, or why aren't you eating this? Like maybe you found yourself at a birthday party and an adult was serving something, or did your parents take care of that?
Yeah. It depended. My parents definitely did their best to create supportive environments, trying to create groups with within our community that had vegan potlucks and were supportive. I did have a number of other friends that were vegetarian, not many other vegans, but definitely vegetarians. They'd take me to conferences like Vegan Summerfest every summer, which was the one place where I knew I could eat whatever I wanted. Like, I didn't have to ask questions. I knew it was all vegan. I met other kids there. If they handed me a snack, I was okay with that. And that was so helpful. Honestly, it was so amazing to have that, one or two places in my life where I was where vegan became normal for a week or a little bit, but that wasn't most of my life. And even though my parents did their best to create that supportive community, and I think they did better than many people do, they still, I still was around lots of families and adults that weren't vegan. Most of the adults in my life were fairly supportive, that I would actually spend time with, the parents and my friends, etc. But in school is when I had a few issues. In sixth grade, I had a teacher, and this was like a private Montessori school, so supposed to be like peace education, more alternative, open to these kinds of things. And a lot of the school was, and I happened to be in the classroom with a particular teacher that was very, very blocked on veganism. And we had lots and lots of struggles. She kind of tried to ban me from talking about veganism in the classroom at one point.
Seriously, tell me about that. Like, how did that conversation go? How did she communicate to a child that they weren't supposed to talk about some things that they were obviously, very passionate about?
Yeah, well, it came about because I was bringing my lunch to school every day, and then kids were asking me about, oh, my tofu sandwich or my veggie sushi roll, like things that were weird to them. And then a lot of them did start asking questions about why I didn't eat animals. And of course, I answered them. And then I also decided I wanted to show them. So I would bring graphic flyers like why vegans, or even if you like meat, to school. And I don't necessarily recommend these activism tactics today, but I would literally, like, they'd be eating a hamburger across the table from me, and I would open up this flyer in their face and be like, did you know this is what a hamburger is made from? Like, here's a dead cow, or you're eating a hot dog. Here's a pig being skinned. And a lot of, I joke that half of the class went vegetarian and half of the class hated me. It was...
So the activism did work.
A lot of kids were definitely very moved and open and wanted to sort of change what they were doing. So it was very interesting to see
Sarina,
that.
give me some hope. So share with us some few, incidents where you shared it with your classmates and they were moved and inspired.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a little fuzzy now. There was so much that happened, but yeah, I remember like one friend in particular, she stopped eating hot dogs and then said she was going vegetarian because she also loved animals and didn't want to hurt them. And that was a pretty direct result of the information I shared. I don't think she ever went vegan, but at that age, when you're talking to 11 or 12-year-olds, I think that's incredibly positive because it shows a mental shift. It shows that they're caring and wanting to change what they're doing.
Yeah.
And another girl went vegetarian, but then when I went so far as to try and get the class fishing trip stopped, then I remember she got very upset and was like, I'm not going to be vegetarian anymore because you won't let us go fishing. And I was like, I'm not the one who cares. This is like you shouldn't be doing this for me. Like, this is, about the animals. And so I was very confused by that. Like, why was she coming to tell me, like, because of you, I'm not going to be vegetarian? So she went vegetarian because of me and then went back because I got our fishing trip stopped or something. And she was upset about that. But then it was all of these interactions that led the teacher to basically say, like, I'm getting complaints from some kids. And I don't really know if kids or teacher or parents were complaining. She just I think was very uncomfortable herself by the information I was sharing.
Of course, you triggered a lot of cognitive dissonance in this, obviously an adult who couldn't wrap their hands around the science that you were very willing to share and the truth that you were very willing to share and you were armed with, by your very mindful parents. So it's really interesting because what I really want to understand and talk more about is, how we say in education, we want our children to have critical thinking. We want them to have information. We want them to be logical and connect the dots and be able to articulate things. And it sounds as though you were not just living your vegan ethic from a point of view of compassion, but you were also bringing a lot of information along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to your parents, they gamified it for you and facilitated that joy of learning. And you mentioned that you were passing it on in your social relationships, even as a young person, and you experienced a lot of pushback,
Mm-hmm.
and that you would do activism in school, like on campus and so on. Um, what was the ultimate consequence of this teacher trying to ban your expression, you know?
It was very frustrating, and I'm very grateful that, my parents were advocates for me and stepped in. But the biggest thing was that I felt, not heard and not listened to, because and another one of the issues I had with this teacher is the way a Montessori classroom works is chores rotate and students are sort of responsible for doing everything from washing the dishes after lunch and cleaning up to, other things. And so, every 3 weeks, it would be my turn to wash the dishes after the students had eaten, meat or whatever the school was serving. And I approached her basically saying, like, I feel uncomfortable doing this. Like, I don't eat meat. I don't want to touch and have my hands in, animal products or dead flesh. Can I have a different job? And she viewed it as I was just trying to get out of chores and, was like, no, you have to do this. You have no option. And didn't listen until my parents showed up and were like, think about this as if we were, and we are Jewish, but they were like, if we were observant kosher Jews, like, you would never. And my teacher was like, oh, of course, Sarina doesn't have to do it. It was like, she did the opposite of what you're supposed to do in Montessori, which is treat children as individuals and listen to them. And she didn't take me seriously at all until my parents stepped in. So like watching, that was very frustrating to feel like I said the same thing. Why couldn't you listen to me? I actually mean this. I'm not just trying to get out of chores. And I remember, talking to her when she tried to ban me from talking about veganism. Like I said, well, kids are asking me questions. What do you mean? How can you keep me from answering someone's question? So I basically just ignored what she said.
Yeah.
But it was frustrating.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Oh my goodness, that would have been quite a spot to be in, and especially as a young child when we were told we're supposed to look up to our elders, and especially teachers have unknowingly and knowingly, they have a lot of authority on how our minds are shaped. So then in school, if unless somebody's homeschooled, we end up spending a majority of our life, our childhood in school with those adults than with our parents, and that's how it is. It's really interesting, how you've had to navigate this very carnist atmosphere, as a child. And I was thinking about how the way some of these adults, in education, have reacted and responded, try to stifle your expression and so on. How did that inspire your career as an educator?
Yeah, I mean, it always gave me ideas of how I would do things differently, like, and I don't think I actually thought about it that much as a kid. I didn't know or think I wanted to be a teacher, or anything like that. But I've always felt a passion for sharing information. And I think it always came from this place of other people don't know what I know. And it's just that simple. Once you know this information, how could you not want to change? How could you not want to live a better life, cause less harm, be more sustainable, compassionate? It was just, the information to me was so straightforward and so powerful. I wanted to share it with everyone everywhere. And I felt like that's always been my calling. It's just, let me share what I know and help others see what I see.
Yeah. And it almost sounds like viscerally, emotionally, you know. And obviously as a young person, you were, as you mentioned, you weren't processing it as logically as, well, I'm going to be the teacher, you know, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
it sounds as though you wanted to be the educator, you wanted to be the teacher that you wish you had had, when you were growing up, who
Mm-hmm.
had the information, who also knew how to articulate and express it in a classroom situation, and deploy their powers of, you know, being able to shape young minds. So Sarina, you grew older, you were then faced with, you know, types of academic tracks and streams to choose from, and a career track after that. um, we've mentioned to our viewers, you chose to be a science teacher, you know. So share with us a little bit about your journey through how you made that choice.
Yeah, so my journey with activism has been very up and down. As a young child, I felt very compelled to share this information, through, you know, being like a teenager, and then I homeschooled at periods, so had lots of flexibility to travel around with my family, visit museums, do activism. But then, you know, as I got into high school, I got a lot more academic, and in particular, and my mom was also, her background was in microbiology. She had always loved science and loved sharing science with my sister and I as well. And so one of the things that I did as a homeschooler and through high school was I competed in science fairs.
Yeah.
So I competed in science fairs for about 8 years, from when I was in like 4th grade through the end of high school. And that was very, very powerful for me. And in high school, it was kind of, you know, people would ask me like what I did for sports. And I joked that like I did debate and science fair. Like those were my sports because they were so time consuming. And for people who maybe don't know, like the science fairs at the high school level are extremely intense and competitive. And there are opportunities that most people wouldn't really be aware of. It's not like just a local thing. So like I spent my summer before junior and senior year working in a cell biology lab at the University of Kansas.
Uh-huh.
You know, for 20, 30 hours a week, depending on the week, and doing like, in some cases, graduate level research as a high school student. And I loved this. I loved being in the lab. I loved getting to work with a professor who was amazing. Like I literally called up a professor and was like, here's this research I want to do. Like, would you let me do this in your lab? And I had to call several before finding one who would. But so it was very self-driven, which I felt was, you know, really powerful. And it made me fall in love with science. The very basic, like I have a question, let me design and set up an experiment, collect data, analyze it, and then presenting it. And I loved the speaking and presenting part as well. And out of these science fairs, like I traveled to the, at the time it was the Intel sponsored International Science and Engineering Fair, because you get like all expense paid trips, they're week-long competitions, and I loved them. I loved the community. I loved the people I met. I loved how inspiring all of these people were. And I knew I wanted to go into science research at that point. I went to college and thought, I'm gonna get my PhD in biochemistry and go work at the NIH doing research. That was what I thought my career trajectory was. But both in high school and then in college, I had a number of experiences that kind of shifted that way of thinking, and some of them being where I started to see direct corruption and corporate influences. And the biggest one for me was actually when I was at a biotechnology competition in high school. And I had advanced to a certain level the previous year, and the following year, I got held back, and it was very disappointing. And one of the judges basically told me the reason he didn't vote for me was, so for a little bit of context, my research was about the chemicals BPA, bisphenol A, and BPS, the replacement compound. You know, they're in plastic water bottles, they're in receipts, and they're endocrine disruptors. And this judge came up to me and basically said afterwards, like, you know, I just wanted you to know, like, why I didn't vote for you, because you spoke really well and this and that. But, you know, I disagree with your research. And I was like, what do you mean you disagree with my research? Like, there's, you know, it's a 20-page paper, there's citations, like, and he was like, well, I work for the paper industry and BPA is totally safe, so I disagree with your premise. And I was like, well, like, did you read my citation? Like what do you mean you disagree with my premise? Like, the research is all there. Like, what did I do wrong? Like, where's the flaw?
Yeah.
And we're just like, I work in the paper industry. BPA is totally safe. Like, all the activists are wrong.
Yeah, well, it's a classic case of circular reference, right? You're working on an Excel file and the formula says it doesn't compute. Why? Because the input is dependent on the output. So garbage in, garbage out. And if you have certain connections, as you at a very young age, discovered already in high school, that corporate interests trump consumer interests often.
Yeah. So it was so, like, I was just stunned. I was disappointed, but I was stunned too. Like, here I am in high school doing what I thought was very basic research. And I had this firsthand, like, and on a broader scale, all of these science fairs are sponsored by all of the big industries, whether it's pharmaceutical, big ag, meat, it's like, there are these roads, like, pathways directly to corporations.
Yeah.
And I don't think most people see that. They're just, participating in it. So that was kind of, I started to see, like, oh, there's some issues in the science where, like, I love real science, basic science, but that's not always prioritized or supported. And that's not what's going on. Yeah. So that was kind of a chink in my plan. And then I go into college, and I had some more frustrations with teachers where I saw, things going on, or saw, like, again, corporate influences, even on my small, private, progressive liberal arts college. And then I started a vegan and animal rights, group on campus, and started to, once again, like, get really into that activism and that direct vegan education, and just sort of found myself really called in that direction and very frustrated by the science world. And another piece of that is, I had thought that by doing, like, cell biology, which, isn't directly like animal testing, that I could avoid working with animals in science. And was shocked again to realize just how much, even in, like, non-direct, animal testing, you've got antibodies that are produced by, harming animals. You have fetal bovine serum. You have, like, a whole host. Like, I didn't even know how much animal exploitation it was possible. And it is just, like, the entire scientific world in biology is steeped in exploiting animals. And that, again, became very frustrating. The stuff that I really enjoyed doing and really liked, it was almost impossible to avoid using animal products. So I kind of steered more towards, like, vegan education at this point, got out of college and worked for like a social justice filmmaking, vegan nonprofit. And that was really great, but also kind of not exactly what I wanted to do either. And so I at times did feel like a little lost. Like, how do I do vegan education, do what I want to do too? Because I didn't really want to just get a job for one of the vegan nonprofits. Nothing felt like a perfect fit. Like, I had these ideas of, this is what I want to say and do. This is how I want to say and do it. How do I make money doing this,
Yes.
Then,
yeah. Allow me to, because everything that you say packs so much punch, Sarina. You're just awesome, amazing when it comes to the connecting so many wildly diverse dots, and I just want to reflect on a few things so our viewers can catch up. So you're at a science fair. This person walks up to you. They're on the jury, so they hold power. And science fairs, you're absolutely right. Debating and participating in science fairs, it takes a lot of time. And you're starting to see already, as a young person, how corporations, moneyed, interests start to interfere with science, which all of us are told and educated to sort of receive as one of the noble, fields where you're in the pursuit of truth. You're trying to reveal, things that are hidden from human senses, using instruments and designs and, human intelligence and so on. And now increasingly artificial intelligence. And obviously that steered your career choices in a certain direction. And I was mentioning to you before, the other day I was talking about veganism because, as you know, I'm very passionate about, plant-based eating, intersectionality within that, and research specifically, and bringing, the ideas of how do you design research and how do you then reveal the truth, to public at large. And there's this parent who got worried about, and they're not vegan yet, they're vegan curious, so they're still, putting their arms around this way of eating. And they said, but if our children, they said, I'm paraphrasing, are indoctrinated in these idealistic principles of compassion and compassion for animals, and take it to an extreme where they were to grow older and refuse to be a part of the system, then how, as a parent, can I feel? How do I feel about their prospects? And obviously they were concerned about, exactly the sorts of things that you're talking about, that, making money outside of the system, which is front and center. And sometimes it feels it is the only system, where employer brands start courting and wooing young minds, even at science fairs. Even those are not left, uncontaminated uh, with this influence. What would you say to a parent like that who holds
Yeah.
those? And I understand, I understand where they're coming from. I don't agree, but I understand what their dilemma is as a parent. How would you respond to something like that?
Yeah, so a number of ways. One, I think that's exactly why we need to change the system, and that is my calling. And I don't think that's everyone's calling either. And I know plenty of people who were also raised vegan and haven't, had and there are plenty of paths that you can go and still, be part of the system while being vegan. And I don't think being vegan is about being perfect either. Like, we live in a non-vegan world. We all have to navigate this. This is just a path and how I've chosen to navigate it. But I know plenty of other people who were just like, okay, the science and biology, that's not my thing. I'm going to go work for a tech company and I don't have any ethical issues with this. There's if you're critical of capitalism and the entire system, of course, it's going to be very hard to which is more the direction I lean. But there are ways to navigate that. And I think it's just about finding your place in it. And yeah, even for me, that meant not continuing to get a PhD in biochemistry at that time. But I went on to become a science teacher, and that felt like a much better fit in many ways for me. I have a particularly high standard, and I have had a more difficult time figuring out what my role and place is. But that has not been how everyone, and I know a number of people raised vegan and with these ethics, and other people have navigated it very differently. So I don't think it's a guarantee that your kid is going to have these issues or not be able to make money. And I don't fault people for, choosing to stay in the system and make money. But if you are so influenced or compelled by these ideas, then maybe your calling is activism and change, and you're not meant to become super rich. Different people have different paths. And I think every child, every person is unique. Yeah. And as a parent, I would say your job is to share the information and then let your child, as they grow up, figure out how they want to, hold that information and what to do with it.
Right. And not try to control it in a way that you actually start controlling the perimeter, where your child can actually go and venture even to make a life-defining choice.
Right.
Such as choosing what do they do for work. Okay, so tell me, when, as a science teacher, now you're on the other side, you're in the staff room, right? You're on the other side of it. What type of a science teacher were you? What were some of the staff room conflict that, you may have experienced, if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah. So after, kind of trying to do activism and traveling for a while, I was like, I really have always liked teaching. And so I applied to a private Catholic school actually that I was teaching at, which was partially because I didn't have a teaching degree. My degree was in biochemistry and policy studies, and public schools want more credentials. The private school I got a job with was like just so happy that my background was actually in science, because that's, science teachers that actually, most people that get a degree in biochemistry go to work for a pharmaceutical company, or, like they're not the people that become teachers. So they were very happy to have me. And I ended up teaching, I was hired as a chemistry teacher. And then later I taught AP environmental science as well.
Environmental science. I wish we had subjects like those being taught in the 80s when I was growing up in Venice school. This is so interesting. Did they allow you to shape the curriculum knowing what
to a certain extent? Yeah. So chemistry was very frustrating for me because I really liked it, but it didn't feel sort of on point to what really mattered, because I was teaching chemistry to the students. I wasn't teaching advanced chemistry, just regular chemistry to the students where it was essentially required. They had to take a science class. Most of them were saying, they were juniors in high school. I'm never going to take a chemistry class again. Like, I'm going to go do something else. Science is not my field, which I liked the opportunity to reach those kids because I really wanted to share my love of science with them. But at the same time, some of what I taught, and I kind of had to teach because I had a lot of flexibility, but there was still, standards and curriculum. And it was frustrating. It was like I'm teaching them how to, balance an equation or draw a chemical compound that they're never going to use again. They're never going to, they are going to do other things. And then they'd ask me questions like, oh, what's the deal with, I saw the red light on the water fountain filter out there. Like, do those filters really make a difference? And what are they actually taking out, out of the water? And I'd hear that and I'd be like, I want to talk about that. Like, that is so much more relevant to their life, the water they're drinking, the quality, the filtering, and it's related to chemistry and science. So like, why can't I teach that? Like, why isn't that our curriculum? And I don't know if I'll ever get to this, but one of the visions I had at that time was developing a type of curriculum where you're still teaching chemistry concepts, but rather than just kind of going through the curriculum, you ask kids what they care about and things like water, and you manage to take that and then connect that to the science and chemistry behind it. And so maybe you don't get to every chemistry topic you're supposed to, but you're like following their interests and actually tying these topics to real world issues that impact that. I think that would be such a better chemistry and science curriculum. I'm very critical of the schooling system, even though I, taught in it. And, but so I loved, AP environmental science more because it was a much better fit for what I wanted to teach. We were able to cover everything from agriculture to water quality to climate change. And so I actually really enjoyed teaching that a lot more. And there were a lot more areas that I could bring things in. But at the same time, that class is teaching to a test. So I couldn't do too much of that other stuff because that mattered even more than chemistry, because you have scores that matter, and statistics of, are they getting college credit? And so, yeah.
There's a lot of pull and push, within the system. There's a drive towards structure and standardization and needing to follow certain curriculum. And I guess it's also driven by the peer group, of schools, et cetera. And every school wants to shine in their own way, and for their students to score high. But at the same time, it's also about making science practical, making math practical. Like, why am I learning geometry if I don't know how to apply it in my real life? Why am I learning chemistry? Like, why do I need to understand Mendeleev's whatever periodic table, and I still remember it, by the way, because in mnemonics and stuff, hydrogen, helium, neon, argon, whatever. But then it's like, what's its worth for me to remember that lithium, is, I don't know, comes before boron, and so on, and carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, whatever. I'm trying to show off now. But so what I'm trying to say is, if we don't gamify it, if we don't, put it in a format such as a case study format, and tie it up with the interests of the students. And water is something really important. I mean, we know what's going on with water issues. There's flash flooding in different parts of the world at this point in time. Pakistan, 1/3 of that country is underwater. 1 out of 7 people, in that country are in a deep state of distress because of water. How can we find a way to embed these real life situations and solutions into our curriculum? Uh, so hats off to you, as a teacher, first of all, as a student, for doing all the activism that you did, and then as a teacher to talk about these different things. And thankfully you did have, it sounds like, some flexibility to shape it. Um, I have so many questions for you, Sarina. I'm going to quickly jump over to one of the questions, which I know that you and I deliberated upon, and we really wanted to bring it to this conversation. Was, sometimes, and I'm using a word that Victoria Moran, who we have mutual admiration for, at the Main Street Academy, she uses a word, Vistopia. It's spelled Vystopia, and she said it's vegan dystopia. It's a composite word. I don't know if she created somebody else, and I find it, sometimes feeling really cynical about, oh, nothing's going to change. Things aren't changing. How many people do we need for them to start making either small changes or big changes or whatever? I would love to hear your well thought out, scientifically considered point of view on how can we make a vegan world possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I just want to backtrack and add something in here that so I quit teaching. I don't still teach high school, but I basically became a full-time vegan educator because I love teaching, and the curriculum was still, for me, the system was too much a box. So I have gone to become a full-time vegan educator. I'm traveling around the country right now. I'm going to be announcing this, shortly, but I have a van that has, vegan information on the outside of it, and I'm traveling around the country. And my goal would be to get into high schools and speak directly about veganism, that I think that should be part of the curriculum, that should be, and I'm looking for ways to create curriculum and materials that we can give to schools. Like so that's kind of what I'm doing now. And in that, part of how I've chosen where to focus my energy or what to do, and, is I've looked at all the different types of activism. I've tried almost every type of activism out there. I've had a lifetime to explore, and at times I've liked different things, but I've always felt called to talk specifically about veganism and speciesism and our views and discrimination of non-human animals, because there is research that suggests that, social change creates a tipping point, that the social change happens, sometimes at a tipping point, and that we can't see how close we are to radical social changes or transformations until we reach this tipping point where things are progressing one way and then all of a sudden there's a big change. And, there's we don't know this for sure. It's kind of hard to study and predict how society changes, but some research suggests that tipping point, really takes about, 20 to 25% of the population to strongly hold an idea for it to create this ripple effect that then transforms the rest of society. And I find that really powerful and compelling, and it fits with my personal experience. In, the vegan and animal rights community, there's a lot of debate about, should we be focusing on teaching people or telling people to eat less meat or make small changes? And one of the arguments for this, right, is that if 90% of the world, ate less meat, but nobody went vegan, think how many fewer animals would be killed. Yeah. And that's a very compelling idea. But from my personal experience and thinking about this research, I take a different approach, which is, while, yeah, that would be great, and maybe fewer animals would be killed, my goal isn't fewer animals being killed. My goal is, I want a paradigm shift. I want people to stop looking at animals as objects and property for us to eat or kill or do what we want with. I want to change our view of non-human animals. And to achieve that, to have a vegan world, which is what my goal is, I feel like it makes a lot more sense to focus on this paradigm shift idea and trying to reach, 20 to 25% of the population with a vegan ethical principle. And maybe that doesn't mean that they're actually eating 100% vegan, but to me, that means getting 20 to 25% of the population to recognize that animals have inherent worth and that they're not objects for us, to basically support a vegan ethic. And, it's not necessarily possible to live 100% perfectly vegan in today's world. So that's not really sort of the goal. The goal is getting people to transform their view, to change their paradigm. And I truly believe, based on the research I've seen, that we could change way fewer hearts and minds and be way, way closer to a truly vegan world by focusing on this tipping point of 25%, rather than let's just dumb our message down. Let's just tell people to eat less meat. And then the argument that people have made is like, well, only 10% of the population going vegan, that's not going to, look at all the animals that are still going to be killed. But I disagree, because we're working towards that tipping point. Yeah. And I think, who knows what's possible? Maybe we reach 25% and like this ripple effect happens where things just start changing really rapidly, because now you have this dedicated group of individuals with a strong ethical paradigm. Yeah. And that's what changes laws. That's what changes subsidies. That's what changes supply and demand. Like, it just shifts everything. Right. So that's what gives me hope. And that's what I focus on and what guides, how I choose to be a vegan educator.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for offering that scientifically sound solution, or an alternative to all the voices out there that rightfully, as you mentioned, want to dumb down the message or dilute it or make it seem more conciliatory and not as extreme as, oh no, now do I have to eliminate all the animals on my plate? And I'm like, yes. Like, why would you want to have a dead carcass in the corner of your menu? If the rest of your menu is all of a sudden so good and clean and compassionate. And it reminds me of that, of what very quickly the restaurant and the catering and the hospitality business is discovering. Even airlines, United Airlines is now offering vegan meatballs on over 800 domestic connections within the United States. I was super happy that they did that. And what they're discovering is that the vegans in the party decide where people go to eat. Right? So if you have even one in a party of 4 who's vegan, and they're thinking about coming to your restaurant, but you don't have a single vegan adaptable meal or anything on your menu, you're losing the business for the other 3 in the party, 3 or 4 in the party too. So I'm just going to bring this graphic up once again for our viewers. Sarina, in under 30 seconds, please explain this graphic.
Yeah, so this is basically, showing that social changes are driven by a minority. It doesn't have to be a majority like we used to think. And this shows basically that, if 1 in 4 people seriously, adopt an ethic of, anti-speciesism, of veganism, of animal rights, that is more likely to actually change the whole paradigm in society than even the other 75%, reducing their meat consumption or inching their way, but holding on to the idea that it's okay to kill and use animals.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm gonna shift things a little bit. We've spoken about how many we will need, for change to happen. We've just, shared about your journey as as a student, and then on the other side as a teacher, and some of the challenges you've experienced. You're from the Midwestern part of the United States. A lot of I have family in the Midwest, and I just love the Midwest for how salt of the earth sort of people there are. Simple, really family oriented, strong value system, and so on. But it also is where, the agricultural heart, so to speak, or shall I say animal agricultural monocropping, intensive monocropping, and heart of this country is based in. Growing up with veganism as your ethic, how was it challenging, if it was, in the Midwest?
Mhm. Yeah, it's very different here. And that was something that I didn't fully appreciate until traveling and spending more time on the coast and in different areas and hearing stories or activism and things that people were doing in other places and thinking like, wow, it's that different. Like people are they're more open. Like they're really, you don't realize it until you're here, but just how blocked the Midwest is. And so an example, I'm from a smaller college town outside of the Kansas City area. So it has like 100,000 people. It's not, a really small town. It's a pretty progressive, one of the most liberal progressive spots in Kansas. It's where the University of Kansas is. It's where I, more or less grew up and went to high school. And we have like a community co-op, kind of like a local version of Whole Foods or something, here. And, my mother used to teach vegan, plant-based nutrition classes. Mm-hmm. And she kind of got fired from her job there for suggesting, and these are people who profess to be against factory farming even, right? Like they're very pro small, local, humane animal agriculture. And, we tried to do activism in the city and we've had so much pushback. Like it is just incredible how even suggesting that, people not support, like they'll say like, I'm against factory farming. And then we tried to get the local co-op to not buy factory farm meat. And that was like too radical, even though they claim to be against factory farming and support local farming. If you write a blog post, if you talk about what happens on any of these farms, you are an immediate outcast from the otherwise hippie, progressive, social justice oriented community. It is one of the most anti-vegan environments that I have been in. Yeah. And I was even shocked when going to Kansas City and trying to do, activism there, how much more receptive people in the city were.
Yeah.
Compared to this. So it's been definitely a big struggle trying to change anything or do anything. People are just very, everyone knows someone who has a farm or comes from a farm and they're very attached to that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And when it's the family's livelihood in question, or if that's the only thing that they've ever known, how to be able to, raise their kids and have some standing in the society becomes really difficult because they identify with that. But you're bringing change in these areas, and especially in the Midwest. Tell us about a project that you're working on that, in just a few months from now, because it's December, when we're airing your interview, and then you have something in store. You've been working very hard on that. So tell our viewers about it.
Yeah, so I am co-organizing a worldwide vegan climate march. And this is it was, I'd had the idea for a while, but I was really inspired by the youth climate strikes that happened back in 2019, the momentum around, making climate action really urgent. But I was always disappointed that I felt like most people in the climate community have these kind of vague calls for like, the government should take action. We need, and to me, the science is really clear on what that action needs to be. We need to end animal agriculture. Like now, we need to stop eating animals and stop supporting and propping up this industry. And we're not going to have real climate action or make a difference if we keep ignoring this issue. So the Vegan Climate March was basically an idea to bring this issue front and center, still, calling for urgent action and marching on climate change. The goal is to have, 100 plus cities around the world all having, sister marches on the same day, calling for climate action. But we have very clear demands, which are, we need a plant-based food system now. We need people who can to personally go vegan and support an alternative system and boycott the meat and dairy industry. And we need to support things like the plant-based treaty, which are working on a more systemic level to get cities and governments to endorse and support a transition to a plant-based food system. And we're not shying away from using the term vegan, because the other piece of this is that we can't just have climate action. Like, part of the reason that climate action matters is because of the individuals that it impacts.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot more people are talking about intersectional justice and how climate change affects, communities of color and all these different, people, and how we need to talk about that. And then everyone's forgetting the animals.
Yeah.
And they're not being included. So it's like, I also at the same time don't really care if it's more sustainable to eat grass-fed beef, because that's also an individual who I believe deserves the right to life. So we're trying to holistically bring all those together in saying that if you care about climate change, we need a veganic food system now. And this is the most ethical food system for people and animals and the planet. So that's what we're calling for.
Yeah. And which is the first city where the nodal march is going to happen?
St. Louis, Missouri.
Awesome. So you're actually striking at the heart of, the very geographies where a lot of resistance is. Yes. How do you think St. Louis is going to receive it?
We'll see. But we kind of chose that. One of our organizers is located there, and so many big vegan events happen on the coast. And we really felt like we need something that centers the Midwest, the middle of the country, and the farming world, and where so much of this is happening, so that we can bring attention to that and be hosting a large event like this in this area to show that there's concern about this here in these communities, in this, near these industries. So, right. Yeah.
Sarina, what I find really interesting is how you're juxtaposing veganism and climate change and bringing those two together in this, really impressive event that you're curating along with your other two co-founders. Because it's in the Midwest, that's where the Tornado Alley, soon to be rechristened as Derecho Alley, hopefully not, but that's the way it seems to be going, right? We're having to change all our meteorological barometers and wet bulb temperature readings and so on to just understand this new, very highly frequent and intense climate phenomenon. Massachusetts, where I am at this point, we're the land of nor'easters and lots of rain. It's called New England for a reason, gray skies all the time. And we've had India type of summer, this past summer, and we're in a state of drought. So the Midwest specifically has experienced so much climate change, but unfortunately, when we look at the state of, climate change perception in the United States, the other day I was reading an article where it said a lot of climate denial and climate change doubt still happens to be in the Midwest. And as a Midwesterner, how would you respond to that? How do you how does that compute for you in terms of you're witnessing it, your farm and the animals, especially on it. I mean, you were rescued. So when we say evacuate Tahoe City because there's a major, wildfire going on in Northern California, we never really think about in terms of human population terms. We don't think about what happened to the wildlife, what happened to the farmed animals. And at best, we think about pet animals. And we have these tearjerker videos, shown on Twitter and everywhere else where a lost puppy and I have all the compassion for the lost puppy, but I also feel compassionate for the calves that were lost and burnt up, So how do you respond to something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really wild how I think one of the most recent videos was a whole bunch of cows in Kansas, where I'm from, that died due to heat and dehydration, a couple weeks ago. It was kind of when it went viral. And I think farmers are they're starting to see this. If you are on the ground raising animals, you're going to realize something's going on, and maybe they'll try and find other explanations or not call it climate change. but I think it's going to be hard to ignore the reality that things are changing.
Yeah.
And I think that will sort of force a lot of people to wake up and to care a bit more about this.
Yeah. We're running out of time, Sarina. It's been amazing, eye-opening, and very insightful to talk to you. Any last thoughts? Where can people find you? How can people support your work?
Yeah, well, thank you. If anybody is looking for vegan presentations in schools, particularly on the East Coast, which is where I'm traveling right now, and in the coming months, I'll be all over. So just, feel free to reach out if you want a presentation in your school or to talk about that. And or if you want to host a vegan climate march in your city, you can go to veganclimatemarch.org and fill out the organizer form. And find me on my website, Born Vegan. That's where there's links to my YouTube channel, my Science is Great podcast, and my Instagram is Born Vegan 1. So just search Born Vegan. I have stuff everywhere. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If you sign up for my email list on my website, I have a free vegan living guide with my 10 top tips to help people make the transition as well.
Yes, and also the flashcards that your mom...
And the flashcards, yes, you can get those as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarina. It's been a pleasure having you on Jivinity Connecting the Dots.
Thank you so much, Nivi. I really appreciated this. Great conversation.
Thank you.